Did you know the population of the world is now more than 5 billion?
Wow, that is a lot of people.
And it's increasing by 90 million people each year.
But the Earth is not getting any bigger.
So when it is your turn to have a family,
Keep it small. The more people there are, the more pressure we put on our planet. So take it easy on our Earth and conserve what you can. The power is yours.
Weapon you can use to fight global warming. Recycle 1 aluminum can a day and you'll eliminate 140 pounds of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere each year. And if you're in a party mood, recycle a 6-pack.
Do your part and wipe out a ton of CO2 at home this year. Then write the president. Tell him to go to the Earth Summit and sign a treaty that will stop global warming.
Save energy at home and tell President Bush to stop the gas.
And my gratitude to Secretary General Maurice Strong for his tireless work in bringing this Earth Summit together. This is truly an historic gathering. There are those who say that economic growth and environmental protection cannot be compatible. Well, let them come to the United States, where in the 20 years since Stockholm, our economy has grown by 57%, and yet we've cut the lead going into the air by 97%, the carbon monoxide by 41%, the particulates by 59%. We've cleaned up our water and preserved our parks, wilderness, and wildlife. Let's face it, there has been some criticism of the United States, but I must tell you, we come to Rio proud of what we have accomplished and committed to extending the record on American leadership on the environment.
As we look back through the windows of history into rooms like this, do you ever find yourself wondering, who are these people? What families are they from, and how many generations of that family have sat in other rooms almost exactly like this one, as they too created policies for us along with other future generations to come? Where were they educated, and what did they learn that would give them the kind of confidence it takes to make decisions on this scale of magnitude? In episode 1, we began our exploration into the mechanism of expertise and how it has been used to leverage the policy suggestions and official agendas of non-governmental organizations and philanthropists across international borders for almost a century. We met some of the most influential world-leading experts that many would have liked us to forget, and allowed them to explain exactly what they were doing and why. Then, in episode 2, we visited the birthplace of a global revolution and witnessed the founding of the first International Authority on Environmental Affairs. Before we move forward to watch this 1992 event develop into the several movements, catchphrases, and institutional strategies we may be more familiar with today, I feel it is very important that we first go back much further in the timeline in order to clear up some common misunderstandings about the true nature of this story. The thing I most love about history is it's fixed. These things already happened, so there's no need for anxiety or reason to rush to some responsive understanding. With history, one literally has all the time in the world. And if something happened, person existed, action was taken, or saying was said, every accounting of it is a story. This story I'm telling truly begins in the generation of our grandparents' grandparents. And in order to actually understand it, one kinda has to think in those type of generational terms. You see, it's important to remember when we go back this far into the timeline, many of the ideas and societal constructs we find commonplace today simply didn't exist back then. In order to best explain this concept, as well as demonstrate the scale of impact even a single individual can have on our collective experience in this new iteration of reality we're calling today, I'd like to try and imagine going back in time to argue against the now almost forgotten Sir Francis Galton. Not only was Sir Francis a founding father and pioneer of modern statistics and psychology, he literally wrote the book on heredity and coined the now famous term nature and nurture while absolutely dominating the academic discussions surrounding it in that era. Alongside his much better known cousin, Charles Darwin, and his greatest defender, T.H. Huxley, Galton helped to shape not only our fundamental understanding of evolution, but also used his ideas, abilities, and tremendous family fortune to at long last help pry humanity free from the controlling grasp of the church and to finally take direction of human evolution into the hands of man himself. In addition to illuminating new aspects of the human experience, his work also helped us understand and, more importantly, measure life here on Earth. As a long-standing fellow and genealogical celebrity of the Royal Society, Galton's travel books, maps, and eventual publication of the first weather charts were all crucial and well-rewarded contributions to the world of his day, while his biometric and mathematical concepts, alongside the scientific procedures he developed in those times, are still in use to this day. In fact, the only thing that helps me understand Sir Francis Galton's impact on the world more than the dreadful feeling of inevitable defeat I get when trying to imagine having to argue with him is when I consider what it would be like today to try and argue without him. Without Sir Francis Galton's concepts of correlation and regression, entire fields of study couldn't exist. He not only invented his own statistical methods and gave us the tools of rigor which now act as the essential nuts and bolts of our empirical human sciences, but his invention of systems like fingerprint identification still act as definitive evidence in courts of law all over the world today. In fact, as a father of modern statistics, meteorology, differential psychology, biometric forensics, and numerous other fields, his contributions to the world of his time quickly became how we've defined truth via statistical probability in ours ever since. In the time of my grandparents, getting a eugenic marriage certificate was commonplace. Fittest family competitions, beauty pageants, and other relics of the good breeding movement, along with many other livestock exhibits for that matter, were still being featured at every state fair across America throughout their long lives. But in the time of their grandparents, humans were only just beginning to understand the concept of genetic heredity. Around that same time, the then 100-year-old fraternal societies of academia were first being introduced to their now long-standing sorority partnerships, as the discussion of genealogical inheritance was bubbling out of both Charles Darwin and Francis Galton's work. I am inclined to agree with Francis Galton in believing that education and environment produce only a small effect on the mind of anyone, and that most of our qualities are innate. You see, the right to govern others has historically been most often God-given. After more than a few collapses, conquerings, and revolutions, these God-given principles of rule began to fall into question. Royal societies and the other academic infrastructures of the new modern world were first developed to serve the crown, but ultimately their work quickly gave birth to the philosophies that would eventually question by what right those who sat under a crown had to rule over them. By the turn of the 20th century, being ruled over by gods and kings was really no longer a question for the minds of those from a high birth and quality education to contemplate. So instead, the academics of that era focused more on how to justify rule in terms of merit. Darwin's Origin of Species had explained natural selection and survival of the fittest as a concept when applied to humans suggested we could now have control over the progression of our own genetic quality. This gave rise to a new set of principles and standards that later became known as eugenics, or what essentially boils down to good genes. Remember, this is a time when the old aristocracies of Britain, France, and Germany, along with the new money crowd in America, were looking to justify their own positions in high society, and the concept of genetic superiority really began to make a lot of sense. Galton, along with others at the time, had developed new systems of measurement that proved out his argument of genetic probability and its relation to intellectual superiority. At which point, he essentially applied the basic principles in farming and husbandry of livestock to human society as a whole. The notion was fundamentally that our best animals should, when bred with suitable stock, produce a superior specimen of said species. If applied systematically to humans, this principle is of what's called encouraged evolution through good breeding, otherwise known as positive eugenics. A great example of which would be the aforementioned collegiate fraternal and sorority systems being newly founded during this time in the US. Each school, or private club, and society has its own filters that, when applied, ensure only a certain grade of stock can commingle with suitable mates. A few of these institutions actually predate the term eugenics itself, but in general, its ideas were already highly popular at the time of publishing Galton's definitive work on the subject. The conversations surrounding nature and nurture had long enraptured high society since even before the time of Malthus, and Sir Francis Galton's 1869 contribution of Hereditary Genius built on top of Darwin's already earth-shattering work on evolution and instantly struck a chord which resonated throughout the entire world. By 1890, he, alongside his best friend and fellow founding father of modern statistics and eugenic probability, Karl Pearson, cemented their legacy after a series of publications in which they had undoubtedly proven that nature wins out over nurture, and by all rights the law of errors, when understood, is as powerful as a god to be worshipped. There is no escape from the conclusion that nature prevails enormously over nurture when the differences do not exceed what is commonly to be found among persons of the same rank of society, in the same country. All over the world, these ideas had caught fire, and the concept of positive eugenics was quickly adopted at nearly every institutional level. Presidents, Supreme Court justices, lawyers and judges, foreign leaders, public figures, scientific and political authorities alike, and regardless of ethnicity, pretty much anyone and everyone who considered themselves to be of fine stock championed these ideas, along with the notion of building a better society through the laws and principles of genetic probability. We are ceasing as a nation to breed intelligence as we did 50 to 100 years ago. The mentally better stock in the nation is not reproducing itself at the same rate as it did of old. The less able and the less energetic are more fertile than the better stocks. No scheme of wider or more thorough education will bring up, in scale of intelligence, hereditary weakness to the level of hereditary strength. The only remedy, if one be possible at all, is to alter the relative fertility of the good and bad stocks in the community. This aspect, I feel, is very important to recognize as we continue our journey further down the rabbit hole that is historical content. Many will argue that race is the foundation of eugenics. They're wrong. Many will also argue that eugenics is a fascist or otherwise political ideology, or even more often a pseudoscience. They're also wrong. There are a lot of misunderstandings and untruths surrounding eugenics. And as we covered in episode 1, by our grandparents' generation, though the institutional influence and ethical frameworks were still in full swing, the word eugenics itself had almost completely fallen out of favor, and the Church of Science Galton had once dreamed it would grow into was instead realized by his intellectual offspring, Sir Julian Huxley. Of course, every coin has two sides. And negative eugenics, or the prevention of unfit stock, seemed to not only be unavoidable, but in fact more humane than letting these poor children be born into a world with no good place for them to grow up. It's difficult to imagine given how this aspect of eugenics later played out in Germany, but when these concepts were first introduced in the 1800s, they were in fact done so from a very progressive and humanitarian outlook. It's important to remember that this was the science when our grandparents and their parents were born. We commonly forget that this outlook was adopted on an institutional level all over the world. Not just here, and of course, in Germany, but also Japan, China, Switzerland, Sweden, and so many other countries that still maintain the same policies and traditions that were based out of the principles of eugenics. Perhaps more importantly, we also forget that the international institutions founded in this period, like the League of Nations or the UN, World Bank, and World Health Organization, they were all founded, funded, and run by very vocal and open eugenicists. And that's okay. This is a fact, one that shouldn't be a matter of shame or taken as some conspiratorial accusation, but simply a point of important historic record. Because when you understand that the people in this room all went to the same exact schools, joined the very same private societies and clubs, and share pretty much an identical lineage as the people in this room, and this room, and of course, this room, then it really helps one understand the intentions behind and nature of the room itself.
We cannot be complacent unless the agreements reached here are accompanied by real commitments to significant change. Change, of course, indeed, for the human species. In my view, Your Excellencies, we simply are headed for a moment in the 21st century where the condition of our species may become terminal.
They don't want to listen to the youth of the world. We call a press conference, they pull us out.
Delegado dos Estados Unidos. We were not demonstrating. This is how the youth are treated here.
Ahí están los derechos del humano, ¿cierto? ¿Dónde están los derechos?
Trust in me. These days, rivers are running clear. The earth itself seems a little cleaner, thanks in part to 51 special women who've made a commitment to keeping our world healthy. Tampax Tampons brings you their inspiring stories in a book, Environmental Actions, showing how you can take action in your community. It's free with flushable applicator Tampax Tampons. Together, we can make a difference for future generations. Why don't you trust me?
All people want to live in a safe environment, yet every day cars and factories pollute the air. Sewage and waste is dumped into rivers and oceans. At the United Nations Earth Summit, world leaders will discuss ways to curb pollution without hindering economic progress.
Representatives from 166 countries, 130 heads of state, and 15,000 non-governmental organizations came together with the hopes of deciding specific agreements that would balance environmental preservation with economic needs. Everyone wonders what happened at Rio. Why did we hear so little about it? With 9,000 journalists, the largest gathering of international press the world has ever seen in one place, it is a wonder why more information was not disseminated. One reason was obvious. The majority of press stayed inside the fortress-like walls of UNCED, the UN Conference on Environment and Development, and roamed around looking for tidbits of news. When a story seemed to be brewing, the hungry crowd of journalists grew frantic, like a pack of piranhas in a feeding frenzy, looking for sound bites and media clips. Yet the real news was taking place 30 miles away in an alternative conference called the Global Forum. Here were gathered the NGOs, or non-governmental organizations, who spoke with a strong voice about the real problems facing the planet. It was in this direction we chose to focus our cameras and glean the wisdom and truths of those who were, for the most part, locked out of the main conference. We now present the powerful insights we heard coming from the indigenous people the women, and the youth. It is their perspectives on the root causes of our global malaise and their logical solutions for planetary healing that the world now needs to hear.
So now there are 5.46 billion of us. By the middle of next century, 14 billion, and the number now we have is already killing the Earth. So what do we do about it? The way we do it is to educate the women of the planet. Most women don't know what ovulation means. They don't know how they actually conceive, let alone do they have access to contraceptives, let alone do they have a decent standard of living, so they have 10 children because 3 might die. So we have to redistribute the wealth so people can eat, feed their children, give them antibiotics, immunisation, and so as they become educated, the birth rate automatically drops. It's everyone's right to have access to free contraception as it is to food.
In order to solve this problem, we have to also do 3 things. We need to create the conditions that we know cause population growth to stabilize, and that means dealing with the causes of poverty. It means raising the levels of education and literacy, and it means respect for women and giving women the ability to exercise power in society. The second thing we need to do is to speed up the development of new technologies that allow us to have a good standard of living without destroying the environment.
We came here to present a solution. If people look at the fact that the meat trade is the #1 abuser of the environment in terms of cutting down rainforests, in terms of water pollution, in terms of water depletion, and in terms of animal cruelty, we would see that as individuals we can make a very big statement about healing the planet, not just by what we say, but by what we eat.
I think all living things have their rights, because they've been here almost as long as we have, and because they can't talk doesn't mean that they don't have their rights. I mean, we shouldn't go down and we should at least save some room for them, because I mean, we're taking up all these big spaces and just throwing them out of their homes. We shouldn't do that.
Dear world leaders, please stop cutting down all the forests, the home for the animals and trees.
We must better preserve our planet in order to nurture our children. And we must better nurture our children if we are to preserve our planet. Thank you.
As we conclude our journey into and come to a much better understanding of the undeniable role that nature has played in this historic moment, we'll now turn our gaze towards the educational agendas and other intellectual efforts that would eventually challenge these naturalist champions and ultimately nurture a new step of evolution and unified scientific movement into existence. But first, I'd like to close with a question. Was Malthus wrong? Today, his catastrophe, more recently known as the population bomb, has been quite widely proclaimed to be entirely debunked for decades, with some scientists now reporting the alarming signs of a seemingly imminent population collapse in its place. In part, all parties involved attribute this dramatic dip in birth rates to an increase in education we've seen across the globe since the founding of UNESCO. To me, the most interesting aspect of this question isn't, why is the education people are receiving, entertainment they are enjoying, and media they are consuming in mass sending out messaging that discourages us from having children? It's, why are we pretending that it's not? Just so we're clear, I'm not claiming that Malthus was right. But I am saying that every claim I've ever heard suggesting that he has been proven wrong seems to entirely omit the enormous and undeniable amount of motivating influence Malthusian ethics have had across all societies in the world. It's almost as if People prefer pretending that the numerous and substantial scientific efforts and achievements towards population control and resource management that we've been exploring never existed. That this proverbial scientific bomb squad hasn't been doing everything in their power to stop the same population bomb from exploding for almost 2 centuries. We like to pretend that the tremendous advancements we've seen in crop yields that are then used to prove Malthus misunderstood or underestimated the ingenuity of man weren't first pioneered at genetic laboratories that were proudly run, staffed, founded, and funded by open and indeed trailblazing eugenicists, many of whom have cited and accredited Malthus's work as inspirational to their own on multiple occasions. We can try to pretend all day that the sexual education and pretty much entire scientific authority apparatus currently advising governments of the world on matters related to environment wasn't very expressively created to achieve the Malthusian goal of avoiding or reversing poverty, sickness, and war by addressing the problems of exponential population growth on a finite planet. So again, I ask, is it that Malthus was truly wrong? Or perhaps, could we just be looking the other way, while the systemic infrastructure founded on these principles continues to deliver on goals that were first justified in a world that was doing everything it could to ensure he wouldn't be right?